Welcome to Madison Church, to our online audience watching at a later date. I'm glad you are all here today. It is the week after Easter. I always try to pick a series that I think will be really good after Easter. You know, I mentioned that we had a really good show up last week, good turnout. So I always try to have a good series to come back to. So you come to Easter and then I want to entice you. Why don't you come back? And so we're doing this new series today, and it's called Searching for Answers. Searching for Answers, which is something you guys do all the time. You guys and gals, you guys do this all the time. What do you do when you want to know the best route to Madison Church? Or when you want a recipe for some really good lasagna? Or when you're dealing with anxiety? No matter what the spectrum is, it could be very practical, like directions, or something very serious, like how do I deal with my depression? What do? It's a verb now. We Google it. Right? We Google it. And within seconds, or whatever preferred search engine that you use, within seconds, your search engine pulls up tens of thousands of what they call search engine results. Search engine results. I don't know if you've ever caught that. They're not trying to tell you hey, this is the answer, but they're saying, here are some people who might know the answer. Here are some websites that might have the answer you are looking for. They're really, really good at it. But I wanted to point that out this morning, that when you Google it or you Bing it or DuckDuckGo or whatever one you're using, they don't directly answer your question. They just connect you with the sources that might be able to answer your questions. And again, they do a really good job of that. And since we are a church community, we have resources around us, we should talk about some of the big questions people are Googling all over the place. And which is what we're going to do the next 6 weeks. Searching for answers, we're going to cover different topics, things that people Google. So throughout this study, we're going to take on, how can a good God allow pain and suffering? That's a big one, right? We're curious about that. Where did the Bible come from? I mean, not the one that you're sitting next to, but where did the Bible come from, and can we trust it? How do I read the Bible? Maybe you're okay with how we got the Bible, or you don't wonder about that, but you're I don't even know what to do with this thing. It's a big book. I pull it out once a week. Next week, Sarah's going to be in town to talk about faith and doubt. Can faith and doubt coexist, or are they mutually exclusive? Today, I want to answer the question, what am I supposed to do with my life? I know you're all really thankful you came to church today, right? You're oh, he's going to answer one of the biggest questions I have. Sort of. To get the answers to these questions, we're going to have to back up thousands of years, which is what we're going to do the next 6 weeks. And so when it comes to this question, what am I supposed to do with my life? We're going to back up. Does anyone know what the purpose of this item is on the screen? Does anyone know why it exists? Okay. Put your hand up if you've used one. If you've owned one, look at that. Most of the room, if you don't, you're just younger than everyone in the room. So that's a good thing, okay? Be proud of that, okay? Does anyone still have one? It's time to get rid of it. It's time to get rid of it. I'm not going to ask if you have a cassette tape, okay? Okay. The Discman, long before Steve Jobs introduced the iPod. And when Steve Jobs introduced the iPod, he was so clever about it. He comes out and he pulls out this little iPod and he says, this can hold 100. Yes, 100 songs right there in your pocket. For all of us who are living on a Discman, we reached the golden age of technology. 100 songs in my pocket, because when you had a Discman, when I was going on a field trip in high school, that morning I had to think which CD I was bringing for the whole day. And if it was a long field trip, I was going to listen to this one CD the whole time, multiple times. I needed 10 good tracks, not just, 1 or 2 hits, all of them. And then, technology advanced at some point. We were able to mix and burn different CDs and all that, but we had to carry these things around. And then I got an iPod in my life. It was just so great. But the person who created the Discman, Sony, who created the Discman, did so to make CDs portable, because before that you had just cassette tapes, portable cassette players. And so they would go with you. But now you have the Discman. What about this beauty? We're going to back up a little bit. Who knows what this is? What kind of telephone? Rotary. Okay. Who has one of these? Time to get rid of it. Time to get. Hey, here's the thing. If you and I are hanging out, and you start having a medical emergency, and this is the only device within like my reach to call for help, well, we're just going to pray. It's over, okay? We're just going to pray. I have no idea how to use it. We're just going to pray for a miracle. A man with the last name Stroger, I believe, Stroger invented the rotary phone to make it possible that you could make a phone call without calling into an operator. So you didn't have to call the operator anymore. You could call your friend directly. It's awesome. This last one, though, is going to be really tough. This last one. People. You've heard of people before? People. What's their purpose? What are they supposed to do? When a person or a group of people design and build a product, whether it's Steve Jobs and the iPod or Sony and the Discman or the rotary phone, when people build a product, they invent something, they're ultimately the one who defines that product's purpose. And sure, through consumers and beta projects and all of those sort of things, the product might change a little bit to better serve you, but it always begins with someone's idea and their intention of how this product is going to be used. Therefore, for us to figure out the purpose of these guys and us, we have to ask, why were we created? What did our Creator have in mind when they created us? I want to put it another way. If you're here today, you are not here on accident. You're not here on accident. Even if your parents jokingly describe your existence as a happy accident, you are no accident. No matter what you have done, and no matter what other people have said about you, you are here for a purpose. Your Creator has given you a purpose. And the purpose, that's what we're asking. What is my purpose? Well, we have to go to the Creator, and the Creator is the only one who can reveal our true purpose to us. Just like the rotary phone, just like the Discman, you and every person in this room, and every person in Madison, and every person in the world was designed for a purpose. I love how Eugene Peterson paraphrases the psalmist's words in Psalm 139. Oh yes, you shaped me first inside, then out. You formed me in my mother's womb. I thank you, high God. You're breathtaking. Body and soul, I am marvelously made. I worship in adoration. What a creation. You know me inside and out. You know every bone in my body. You know exactly how I was made, bit by bit, how I was sculpted from nothing into something. Like an open book, you watched me grow from conception to birth. All the stages of my life were spread out before you. The days of my life, all prepared before I'd lived one day. You're not just made by happenstance or biology. What the psalmist is telling us is that you are so wonderfully made. You are so complicated. And yeah, there's a little bit of good in there and there's a little bit of evil in there. But man, you are so wonderfully made and intentionally and purposefully. And not only did God create you, but we're told something extra in Genesis 1. God said, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. We say that we are made in the image of God because God declares upon creating men and women, upon creating humans, God says, let us create them in our image. Let's pause and really think about this. You bear the image of God. You're created in God's image. When God created you, He had you in mind, and He had Himself in mind. So if we want to know the answer to the question, what am I supposed to do with my life? We have to ask, what were we created for to begin with in the first place? There's a framework in the Bible, the Old and New Testaments, that help us. Followers of Jesus, we don't presume everybody is, but followers of Jesus discern what our God-given purpose is. And this three-part framework is identity, calling, and assignment. So first, talking about identity. In his letter to the church in Ephesus, Paul reminds the followers of Jesus there, we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus so that we can do the good things He planned for us long ago. Now, when we think of masterpieces today, you might think of famous paintings like Van Gogh's The Starry Night. You might think of a fancy dinner that you take a picture of and you post it on your Instagram, maybe something made by Gordon Ramsay. You think of beautiful architecture that was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. When we think of masterpieces, that's what we think. If you were to ask God what he thinks when he's talking about a masterpiece, Paul tells us he thinks of you. He thinks of me. He thinks of our neighbors and he thinks of our coworkers. He thinks you're his artwork. You are God's masterpiece. So not only are we created in God's image with a purpose, but we are a masterpiece. And not just that. God doesn't just create us as a masterpiece. Paul says so that we can do the good things he planned for us long ago. God created you intentionally in his image, not for the sake of doing so, but because there's something that needs to be done, and he wants you to do it. He wants me to do it. There's work to be done that he has prepared in advance for all of us. That's what I'm saying when I say you're not an accident. Before you were ever born, God was thinking of you in this thing and these things that he would want you to do and accomplish over the course of your life. And I wonder if you've thought of that before. When we ask the question, what am I supposed to do with my life? This is essentially what we're asking. God, what on earth am I here for? What is my purpose? And God says, you are a masterpiece to do the work I have prepared for you in advance. This is where we have to start. We start with our identity. And I can remember, just like all of you, maybe you're in a space where you're like, I don't know my identity. I don't know if I'm a follower of Jesus or what, but then what are you? Questions of identity, they could be, well, I'm a mom, I'm a dad, I'm a parent, I'm a spouse, I'm in a relationship, I'm a child. And those are important aspects of our identity, our race, our ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identification, all of those things. Those are part of our identity. But as followers of Jesus, we're called to elevate that. Everything else kind of pales in comparison to the fact that we're a follower of Jesus, that we're created in God's image, in the image of God. And so if we're ever going to ask the question and get an answer, what am I supposed to do with my life? The first thing we have to ask are questions about our identity. How do we see ourselves? And how do I see God? And how does God see me? We have to come back to this. Our identity, and this is good news. This is good. I know when I talk about parenting and all these other aspects, you're like, these are very important to me. But here's why being a follower of Jesus and a child of God and that being your identity is better. Because it's not based on your accomplishments or lack thereof. It's not based on your successes or your failures. It's not based, and this is good news for some of you, it's not based on how much money you have in the bank. You're like, yes, this is good. I can get behind being a child of God. It's not based on how many followers you have on Instagram or TikTok or whatever the next one's going to be. Your identity is something that you can't earn. It was given to you. Your identity is something that you can't lose. It's solely based on God's grace, on who God is and what God, through Jesus, what we talked about last week on Easter, has done for us. And it's important we start here because the culture around us, the society around us, ends here. But we start here. And I'll come back to that idea in a moment. The second aspect of understanding our purpose is calling. So once we really get the foundation down that, hey, my identity is I'm a follower of Jesus, I'm a child of God, created in his image, the next thing is calling. And we tend to think of this in our culture, in North America, our calling is like, what are you supposed to do? Like Stephen's a pastor. He was called to do that. That's how we use it. Biblically, that's not how it's ever used. Biblical calling isn't about your vocation. We'll get to vocation next, but biblical calling goes back to our identity. We're a child of God. So what as children of God are we called to do? Well, for example, when we're talking about biblical calling, Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your mind, heart, body, soul, strength. And he says, and love your neighbor as yourself. This is the love God, love people, the greatest commandment. When we talk about biblical calling, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about obedience. What kind of person has God called you to be? And oftentimes it's the same for a great many of us. None of us get off the hook of loving our neighbor. You all have to love your neighbor. It's just part of the gig. Not some of you, not the people in the room, not the extroverts. All of us are instructed. We are called to love God and to love people. And then from there, and I started with this one because from there it trickles down, right? Jesus says everything in the Old Testament, everything in the law was essentially about these. And so we can kind of use that as our filter going forward. Should I do this? Should I do that? What's my calling? Well, does it love God? Is it about loving people? And when we run it through that filter, if it's not yes, well, then maybe it's not part of your calling. This command, our call, orients our hearts to God. And it includes loving our neighbors, even the ones that are hard to love. And it protects us from making this impulse of following Jesus as like a personal and private decision only, which has been very popular for a long time, present culture, but it's like you pray the prayer and you're saved. And then it's your personal relationship with Jesus. And then all of a sudden we like get to not be a part of a church community. We don't have to contribute to the world around us. We're off the hook for that. When we're talking about loving God and loving people, we see very much that our calling isn't personal or private. Yes, what you do matters. You have to accept the gift. You have to do things. There is a responsibility here, but it's not just private. Following Jesus leads us to living an open and transparent, a real and practical, and oftentimes costly life. And not costly like expensive, but costly like it's Friday night and the neighbor has an emergency and they're asking if you can let their dog out in the morning. Costly. Those little things that come up. That's what following Jesus, that is our calling. It's on these two commands, loving God and loving our neighbors, that the entire law and prophets hang on, Jesus says. Everything is all about this. So when it comes to this question, we'll keep coming back to it. What am I supposed to do with my life? My identity, child of God, created in his image for good works. Well, then when we think about our calling, everything, no matter what we do, work, industry, the job, whatever position you have, your home, your neighborhood, wherever you spend Monday through Friday, and sometimes Saturday and Sunday too, wherever it is from 9 to 5 or third shift, how are you loving God in those roles? How are you loving people in those roles? Tim Keller writes a fantastic book called Every Good Endeavor. It is great if you're not in full-time ministry, which is all of you all, right? Every good endeavor is great. And he writes, a job is a vocation only if someone else calls you to do it for them rather than yourself. Aha. A lot of us have jobs, don't we? And so our work can be a calling only if it is reimagined as a mission of service to something beyond merely our own interests. Thinking of work mainly as a means of self-fulfillment and self-realization slowly crushes a person. You see what doctor, pastor, author Tim Keller is saying is that our work is more than a paycheck. It's more than retirement. It's more than those sweet vacations that it can pay for. It's more than just the different ways we're contributing, and it is about contributing. But he says, examine the work that you do. Whatever it is, whatever you call your work, how are you loving God and loving people? How are you reimagining it as a mission and bringing God's kingdom from there to here? No matter what your industry is, your position, job title, again, your salary, hours worked, all of us must begin as children of God created in his image. We all must begin to think of our calling as a means to serve something and someone beyond our own interest. This is our calling as people made in the image of God. And rather than a list of do's and don'ts, Jesus gives us the direction. Love God, love people. This is the calling. It trickles down from there. And I know as people who live in our Western society, we want the GPS. We want to see the 3 best routes. And we want to make a determination on which of the 3 routes I want to take. And we want the step by step. And that's rarely what we get with God. God is more like an old school compass. When we get a point, head north. And you start going north, and all of a sudden you get to a river. You're like, well, what's the best route around the river? And God says, go north. And you're kind of, okay. And you get to a mountain. What am I supposed to do here, God? Is there a preferred way? Is there a way that maximizes resources? And God says, keep going north. and you have your compass. And this is what God is like. And so when it comes to our calling, our identity is solidified. But when it comes to our calling, it's a little bit more like a compass. It's a direction than it is a GPS. And finally, and this is the part when I think we ask the question, what am I supposed to do with our lives? I think that this is the part that we come to the most. And we think that if I could just answer this, I'll know what my purpose is. But it's assignment. Again, this is where we want to begin our search, but this is actually where we should end it. This is where the society around us begins the search. So say, when we meet someone new, hi, I'm Steven. You are, nice to meet you. This is on the golf course. What do you do? Is my natural next question. After I maybe ask them how often they play. Because I want to know if I'm going to get my butt kicked. If they don't play ever, maybe we'll make some bets. We'll see how the day goes. But then it's like, what do you do? And what I'm trying to do is we're creating a little small talk, but essentially it's like we're creating someone's identity based on what they do. Well, I'm a teacher. So that's what you do. That's who you are. We go to the Instagram, the Twitter bios, and we see that that's who I am. I am this. I am that. But when it comes to being a follower of Jesus, being a child of God created in the image, those things, again, come secondary. Not just secondary, but thirdly. Paul has some advice, though, when it does come to your assignment. Colossians 3:23, work willingly at whatever you do, as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. This is a very challenging verse that probably deserves its own series. But no matter how great your job is, how much it pays, or how bad your job is, how little it pays, you're in between work, you're a stay-at-home parent, whatever it is, Paul's instruction is to do it as though you were working for God. Not your boss who might be a chump, not the coworkers who might talk about you behind your back. But he says, have the attitude and put in the work ethic like God is whom you're serving wherever it is. That is an instruction that has to do with our assignment. I want to say this about assignment. Your assignment will likely change multiple times. I mean, we have research now that shows that people are going to make at least 2 career switches, could go to a completely different industry at some point in their life. So the assignment can change. But here's why this is the third part of our framework. Because even when your assignment changes, and you go from this field to that field, and you go from all of this money to no money, or no money to this money, whatever it might be, your identity is still the same, and your calling is still the same. Your assignment can change based on where you are, the season of your life. If you're in a place right now where you're wondering, what is my assignment? I've convinced you your identity. I've convinced you the calling, but you're at a place where you're like, what is my assignment? I would say, look around you. God's brought you to Madison for a reason. Look at where you live. What neighborhood are you in? Where do you go to work? What's that building like? Where do you play? Where do you like to hang out on the weekends? What bars do you go to? What coffee shops do you visit frequently? What are your hobbies? Use all of that to discern, because God is speaking and has placed you there for those reasons. Now, when you think about assignment, some of you might be feeling a little bit discouraged, and I want to just acknowledge that right now. You're in a season of learning. You might be at school taking a ton of classes. You don't necessarily feel like you're contributing a lot, but you're learning a lot. You're overwhelmed by that. So you might be in school. It might be a learning season. Some of you might be in the early years of parenting, and you're wondering if life will ever be more than getting the kids dressed, fed, changed, and then dressed, fed, and changed again after they threw up on themselves, and time just feels impossible. The current season that we're all in is the economic twisting and turning, and more downs than ups. And so you might be in between jobs, or worried about your job, or looking for a job and not getting a job, and you're wondering what's next. And so when it comes to this assignment, I want to acknowledge the assignment conversation. Some of you might be feeling discouraged. But even here in the in-between places, in the waiting spaces, in the overwhelming times, the discouraging times, we're still to love God and to love people. No matter where you find yourself, no matter what season you're in, good or bad, high or low, God has an assignment for you in that season. And so if you find yourself in a waiting space, the question we need to begin to ask is am I wasting this waiting space? Am I wasting this season? Is there a lesson for me to learn right now while I'm waiting? Is there something that the reason my schedule is cleared is because there's something I won't get to when my schedule gets busy again? What am I supposed to do here and now? God says your identity is that you're a child of mine. Your calling is to love God and love people. And for your assignment, oftentimes you get to choose, which is really cool. Oftentimes you get to choose. But we do make a couple mistakes when it comes to choosing our assignment. Okay, a couple mistakes. The first one is we don't do anything because we're so scared we're going to screw up. So we don't do anything. Like, we really need a thunderbolt from God to hit the ground, to write in there or painting on the wall, God, what is it that you want me to do? Because if I do the wrong thing, Lord, I'll just screw up my entire life. I just want to say, take a breath. God is way bigger than that, and you're not going to be able to screw it up on even 100 million bad decisions. Okay? Take a breath. Do something. Okay? God can God can steer a moving car better than a parked one. Okay? So if you're wondering what's next and you're like, well, I don't want to screw up, put the car in drive, make a decision, do something. God will help get you on path. The other way that I think we make a mistake when it comes to our assignment is that we never consider what God really wants. Right? We never consider what God wants. There's one hand, we're so scared we're going to screw up our lives. And on the other hand, we just never think about it. Well, I was offered a raise at work if I took this job. So obviously God wants me to make more money, right? Well, if that was God's only priority in life, and if the calling of life was to make more money, then yes, that's obviously what you should do. But I like to ask this question a lot. And if you're offered a job tomorrow, please don't turn it down just because I'm saying this. Okay, really pray. This is between you and God. But really, when was the last time you turned down a job? A promotion, a career advancement. You turned down more money. When was the last time you did that? Because you asked God, is this what I should do? And God said, I don't think so. I don't think so. And I know for a lot of us, the answer is no. Okay, I'm not shame, no guilt. I'm not trying to twist your arm. Again, don't turn down a job tomorrow if by happenstance you're offered it. This is between you and God to figure that out. But my point is, when it comes to our assignment, do we actually consider what God wants? And do we consider that his values for your life and that purpose and that work you're supposed to do often is not dependent on what the 401k package looks like? And I'm not saying that those things aren't important. They absolutely are important. But when it comes to making a decision, if our decision was, it pays good, it's here, the benefits are awesome, blah, 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 and number 10, I guess God's probably for this then, right? Because I'm not selling people or something. Guys, I think you're missing it. I think you're missing better assignments because you don't stop to ask those questions. We begin my identity, child of God, created in God's image, my calling to love God, love people. And so then when I consider what job, what industry, what jobs am I going to apply for, it should be done in the context and the filter of those things. And again, once we get there, we have some freedom. But freedom comes with responsibility. Don't sit back and wait for the lightning bolt to happen. It rarely ever happens. You can actively seek ways to fulfill God's purpose in the time and places you find yourself, whether it's you have your job right now, you're looking for a job, you're in a waiting space. And again, another aspect, don't quit your job tomorrow either. Really sit on this and pray on it, okay? I don't want to get a call on Wednesday night, you're freaking out how you're going to pay your mortgage because Monday you quit your job. Okay, well, let's work on this together. So here's some questions for you. When it comes to your identity, when it comes to, what on earth am I here for? Do you know God? Do you know God personally? Do you need to take steps to better connect with God? That's where to start. We start with our identity. When it comes to calling, it's beyond what we do. What are the opportunities that already exist around you to serve people? How can you show people God's love this week, wherever you work? Okay, those are kind of some of the questions. And when it comes to this last one, this assignment, why don't you ask God this week to help you choose? When it comes to assignment, why don't you pray, God, help me choose which promotions, which jobs to take, what industries to do. Help me to do this. And I mentioned in our society, it's often assignment, calling, identity. But the one thing I want you to take away from today, if everything else is a blur, remember, within the Christian faith, we start with identity before our calling and before our assignment. Imagine how the people in the world around us in Madison, Wisconsin would react if we would respond the opposite way when it came to jobs. If you got to tell someone, man, why did you turn that job down? That was great. Because we talk about the people in the soap boxes downtown on the corner and the Turner burn people, and we're like, that's not good. That's not helping people. And for those of us who have encountered Jesus and followed Jesus, we know Jesus is good. We know that Jesus can transform our lives, and we wish the people around us, family, friends, coworkers, also knew Jesus and experienced that. Well, we know that that's not the way. But now imagine this. Imagine you had the opportunity to explain to someone the reason you turned it down was because you just didn't feel like that's where the Spirit was leading you. What do you mean? It paid more. Yeah, my God doesn't operate on American currency. But it was a promotion. It was a better title. Yeah, my God doesn't really care about what numbers and letters come before or after my name. Imagine what would happen in our workplaces if we became lights like that. Because what we do when it comes to our identity and what we're supposed to do with the rest of our lives, it makes an eternal difference. Author N.T. Wright, in just his groundbreaking book, Surprised by Hope, says, what you do with your body in the present matters because God has a great future in store for it. What you do in the present by painting, preaching, singing, sewing, praying, teaching, building hospitals, digging wells, campaigning for justice, writing poems, caring for the needy, loving your neighbor as yourself. These will last into God's future. These activities are not simply ways of making the present life a little less beastly, a little more bearable until the day we leave it all behind, but they are part of what we may call building for God's kingdom. What are we supposed to do with our lives? You're a child of God. You're to love other people. We have an assignment. We choose wisely. And we're reminded, we're encouraged that it makes an eternal difference. So let's support one another in that. In the seemingly mundane day in and day out, let's continue to be faithful, as well as taking big, risky leaps of faith along the way, living out the purposes that Jesus has given us